Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Hearing. I'm Brian Taylor, and I'm really pleased today to have our guest with us, taking time out of a really busy schedule to join us. That is Donna Sorkin, who's the Executive Director of the American Cochlear Implant Alliance. Donna, welcome to This Week in Hearing. I'm so pleased that you can be with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, I really want to know a little bit about your background and also what the American Cochlear Implant Alliance does. So if you can maybe tackle both of those questions at the get-go here, that would be great.
Sure. I actually wasn't trained in hearing related issues. I have a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government. So that's kind of how I approach this. Mm-hmm. And I come from a family of people that had hearing loss. And my dad and my paternal grandmother both had hearing loss. And they both used hearing aids, and not very successfully. My father retired at age 56 because he couldn't do his job anymore. And I remember him, repeatedly looking for something better so that he could continue to do what he wanted to do. I was luckier. And, I arrived on the scene when we had cochlear implants available. And I received a cochlear implant in 1992. So I was a real early adopter of this amazing technology, one surgery. And then recently I received my sixth sound processor. So I've been very fortunate to benefit from the evolving technology and see firsthand the changes that have been made, and the fact that this can all happen with one surgery, because so much of what is done to the technology is done on the outside in the sound processor that people wear. So that's kind of my background. I got into this because honestly, at the time, I was starting to do strategic planning for nonprofit organizations. And the organization that's now called Hearing Loss Association of America was going through a transition. The founder was retiring, and they were looking for a director. And I thought, deaf woman doing strategic planning, maybe they'll be interested in hiring me. So I applied. I didn't think they would hire me, but I thought maybe they would hire me to do it, not to be their director, but to help them do a strategic plan. And they hired me. So that was my first entrance into this field. I'm not sure I've told that to people recently, but that's what happened. And I stayed there 6 years. And then I went to the Alexander Graham Bell Association, which of course is an organization that focuses on children. And I was there 3 years. And then I left to focus on cochlear implants, and I went to Cochlear. And was there a bit over 11 years, working on consumer issues, reimbursement, rehab, all the kinds of topics, really just what I do now, and I got into that there. It was really an important experience for me in terms of understanding the whole cochlear implant space. And then when this organization was starting up, it really was a dream for me. It was something that some of us had been talking about for a long, long time.
Right. And you're referring to the American Cochlear Implant Alliance.
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that, because it's only been around for about 10 years, if I'm correct.
We just had our 10th year anniversary. So a number of clinicians realized that cochlear implants fall through the cracks, and all of our member clinicians, and that includes surgeons and audiologists, speech language pathologists, psychologists, educators, people who work with individuals of all ages across the care continuum, in teams typically. People realize that regardless of where they were, this intervention falls through the cracks. So they decided, let's start an organization that just focuses on cochlear implants. And that was what they did. And we had talked about it for a number of years. And then finally, a group of clinicians got together with support actually from the cochlear implant companies, gave us some seed money. And we had a mission statement that is the same mission statement that we have today. They were really spot on from the beginning to improve access to cochlear implants through research, advocacy, and awareness. And that's still our mission statement. They got it right on the first try. So,
well, and I know that you just concluded your annual meeting last week. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of the hot button issues that were happening at that meeting.
Mm-hmm. So that meeting really is a clinical research meeting, and people come with their research that is always very focused on what the clinical implications are. And so we had some longer talks, but mostly the meeting are short research talks of about 9 minutes. And people share what they're doing and what the implications are for clinical care. Of those talks that came out, a range of different things. There was a lot of things on outcomes and how we can improve outcomes in people of all ages. There were some really cool new tools that were actually introduced by the CI companies about planning for surgery and thinking about how we can get closer and closer to normal hearing during the surgical portion of this. So that aspect is explored at the meeting in a lot of depth, and that was actually the focus of a number of the industry talks. And the companies have time that we call satellite symposia. So it's not part of the medical meeting, but they're very, very well attended. And so there's that part of it. And then there's the scientific meeting that's planned by a program committee of individuals from around the country, from different institutions, large and small, universities, non-universities, and people with all different backgrounds and different degrees, et cetera. So that part of it, there was actually quite a lot on single-sided deafness, for example, this time, a topic that we started talking about at our very first meeting, just a little bit, and that was in 2013 was our first meeting, and I had, in the talk that I did on reimbursement, I mentioned that was called an emerging issue in 2013, and now we have reimbursement for it. There's actually most people are getting reimbursed for SSD. And it's because we realize it's a better solution to single-sided deafness than what people had been using. Some of the other solutions were using it in children. Talking about how the FDA guideline is not the best for children, because right now it's 5 and under. It really needs to go down to the same age that we use for children who have bilateral deafness, which is 9 months. We talked a lot about the whole issue of how we can combine cochlear implants and hearing aid technology, because people come to this with more residual hearing than they did 10 years ago. And people are encouraged, if they, particularly if they're over 65, we don't cover bilaterals. So through Medicare, that is. So we're really looking to emphasize how the cochlear implant and hearing aid can work together. So a lot of discussion about that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, there's a couple things I'd like to address with you. I think maybe you mentioned bimodal fits, hearing aids combined with a cochlear implant. Let's talk about adults. I think in my experience as a clinical audiologist, I know that many audiologists out there are maybe a little bit intimidated by cochlear implants. And they don't realize that the candidacy requirements are quite broad these days. And it's amazing the results that a lot of patients get with them. A lot of audiologists think that they're still hearing aid candidates when they're really cochlear implant candidates. So maybe from an adult perspective, if you could talk a little bit about access, about broadening the candidacy requirements. I think our audience would want to know that.
Sure. So Very recently, we started a formal process with Medicare to expand candidacy criteria to match the FDA criteria. I shouldn't say very recently. We actually started this about 7.5 years ago with this study. And then Medicare, CMS accepted the study and recently let what's called a national coverage determination. And that happened on March 1. And what that would do is provide very similar criteria to what the FDA have for adults who are under 65. And what that means is, in best stated condition, an individual would be a candidate for a cochlear implant if their AC bios sentences were between 40 and 60% correct. So you can have as much as 60% words and sentences and be a candidate under Medicare. And the reason they did this was that the study confirmed that on average, people are going to improve 20 to 25% above what they're doing with hearing aids. So it should not be viewed as a last resort. It should be viewed as a way to help someone stay connected. And up until now, the Medicare criteria were no more than 40%. So if we think about someone, an older person who can only understand 39%, 40% of words and sentences, what does that mean in terms of their lifestyle, their comfort level with going out, with being involved in social activities, with travel, with, all the things that we want people to do to stay connected. And we know that there's a positive influence on their cognitive health. There were a number of studies actually that were presented at the meeting that demonstrated that cognitive health, mild cognitive impairment actually improved in individuals that received cochlear implants in significant degree.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. It's really important that the audiology community, as well as those hearing aid dispensers who are not audiologists, who are seeing 50% of adult patients, and we're working with them as well, recognize at what point they can help their patients do better. And they won't necessarily lose a patient because that individual will still use a hearing aid on their other ear in most instances, and we encourage them to do that. And the other thing that people, I think, have thought in the past is when you get a cochlear implant, you're going to lose all that residual hearing that you have in that ear to be implanted. That's not true anymore. The electrode array is different. The surgical procedure is different, and we are able to preserve a good bit of that residual hearing, and that has changed. When I was implanted in 1992, it was the case that you lost all your residual hearing. I'm totally deaf in that ear, but it's not the case anymore. People retain a good bit of their residual hearing, and so, depending on, where that hearing is, sometimes they actually use a hearing aid along with the cochlear implant. They certainly are going to use a hearing aid in the contralateral ear, and they're encouraged to do that. So that's really good news. I mean, that's really providing people with so much more hearing, so much better ability to stay connected in the world. And instead of continuing to decline, to improve.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. Well, one thing that we talked about briefly before we started the interview today was, you mentioned this concept, continuum of care. And I think that's a great way to frame sort of the process and the journey. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by the continuum of care?
I think what we're hoping will happen throughout hearing health, regardless of where someone sits and what their title is, that they will realize that they're part of all of those solutions to hearing care. A lot of times what happens now is someone who provides cochlear implant care, that's all they do. But what I'm seeing in some instances, like Georgetown University, I visited recently, and their audiologists actually do both. They fit hearing aids and they work on cochlear implants. So that's really great because it makes that person be familiar with someone. They'll be in a position to say someone, well, you're not a candidate right now, but if your hearing gets worse, you will be a candidate. And we can start talking about it at that point to ensure that you're continuing to hear the most that you can hear. And that concept, whether somebody's sitting in a clinic that provides cochlear implants or whether they're in a private practice that doesn't, they should be thinking in those terms, what can we provide to provide someone with the best that they can hear, and also helping them. I mean, we where I used to work, we talked about assisted listening devices a lot, and so that's part of the conversation too, regardless of what device you have. It's everything that helps that person maximize their communication abilities.
Well, and I think it's an exciting time for professionals and for consumers as well, because you have non-custom amplifiers, over-the-counter devices, you have implantable solutions, even pharmacological agents potentially down the road. And all of that, I think, is part of the continuum of care concept that you're talking about. So I think it's good for everyone to know that that's happening.
And it's also good for them to know that they're part of all of those solutions, that it's not the people that do cochlear implants are over here and the people that do hearing aids are over here. I mean, what we are really trying to do as an organization is welcome them in. And I was pleased that we had some hearing instrument specialists that came to the meeting. And we have a collaboration with that organization as well. We provided free memberships to them. And we are very happy when they invite us in to come to one of their state meetings and present. So I think that's something we're really excited about is working with everyone who's involved in hearing healthcare, so that we're supporting each other, so that it's not one group over here, another group over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the other end of the age spectrum, infants and children. What are some of the latest developments around cochlear implants when it comes to the pediatric population?
Yeah. So, I think that the greatest thing that happened was when the FDA changed the age to 9 months, so that we can get children into this process at that early age. We still have some challenges with some insurers who mess around with the 9 months. Sometimes it's Medicaid. In some states, of course, Medicaid rules are decided state by state. So in some states, they'll say, well, you can't even put the paperwork in until the child's 12 months. So that means by the time the kid gets it, they're 18 months. And we have seen differences in how well children do when they're implanted early. In some clinics, if the child has no risks, they will implant under 9 months. They will do that as an off-label and get authorization from the insurer to do that. It's much more typical now if a child has meningitis. And we want to get the implant in very fast before we see ossification of the cochlea. It's much easier to do that now because it's more routine to implant these younger children. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is use of implants in children who have single-sided deafness, which is something we didn't do years ago. We still have a problem with the FDA guideline for SST starting at 5 years of age. So that's something we've had discussions with the FDA about. We were part of a workshop that the FDA put on in early May. And that was something that our clinicians really talked about a lot. We tried to impress upon the FDA what a problem that was to not be able to put a CI on a child who's single-sided deaf until they're 5 years of age. So that's a challenge, and because it's such an opportunity. If you in fact can get that implant on there, we've been looking at single-sided hearing loss in children with mild to moderate hearing loss for 20 some years. Fred Best did research on this years ago, and there was that research that he had done that showed that children who have an untreated mild hearing loss have a 1/3 chance of failing one grade. So we're talking about a child with a mild unilateral hearing loss, and they have a significant impact on their on their educational attainment. Mm-hmm. So for a child who qualifies for a cochlear implant, my goodness, obviously there's going to be a big impact. There's all kinds of issues that they have. And we know that children with SSD who get a cochlear implant don't necessarily do as well as children who have bilateral deafness, but they get a lot of other benefits. They hear better in noise, they have improved directionality, and they still get about typically 30 to 40% words and sentences. So it's not, as dramatic as what we see in children with bilateral deafness, but it really does improve them. And I think there's been a change of thinking in a lot of our audiologists and surgeons about the importance of looking at SST in children and using this as an intervention for that population. And there were a lot of talks on that. Right? So that was, that's a big important issue that we're looking at. And there are some clinics that do this routinely. Nancy Young, who's been doing cochlear implants for 30 years in Chicago at Lurie Children's, routinely does surgeries for children with SSD, and she's one of the ones that has really pushed on it. So we have a lot of leaders like that, and what's really great is they're all together in this one place, and it was so great for them to be back together again last week. In person.
Yeah, it's a really unique organization because it cuts across so many different specialties. So it's a unique organization in that sense, I think, in our profession at least.
It is, and what also is important is that they most of them are active in their other organizations. So they take what we do at the American Cochlear Implant Alliance, and then back to AAA or ACIA or AO, and work on it with their colleagues as well, and so that. We don't take people away from the organizations that they're in. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's an ad, and we work closely with those organizations as well. And we had representatives from all of the big ones at our meeting last week. We invited them to come. They did come. They participated. And so that's another important advantage, I think, of what we do. We have grown organizationally. We have almost 2,200 members now. When I came and started in 2012, we had, I think, 100 members. So that's been exciting. And we've also added consumer and parent members, not necessarily to come to a meeting like this, because this is a science meeting, but to work with us on public policy, particularly, to be advocates, to tell their stories when we need them to do that. So that's sort of a new area that we pushed into, so that we also have that group that's part of the organization is interacting with us. We have a parent member of the board. Since I've come, we've always had a parent member of the board, and that's a really important aspect. We have a surgeon who has a cochlear implant who's on the board. So I think organizationally, we really try to incorporate the recipient community into the meeting. And there are surgeons and audiologists that have cochlear implants. Sure, they come to the meeting.
Right. No, it's great to see. I also noticed that in the new Market Track 2022 from the Hearing Instrument Associations that that cochlear implants now are being tracked by them, which is kind of good to see. For the first time, I think, in 30 some years of looking at hearing aid ownership and opinion of hearing aid users, now they're taking cochlear implants into consideration, which is it's good to see that broader support.
That is great. I agree.
So it's if any of our listeners are interested in learning more about the American Cochlear Implant Alliance, can you tell us how to get in touch with you, your website?
Sure. And it's important to know that our website actually is designed for people that are outside of cochlear implants.
Mhm.
And we design it that way. It's designed to be a resource for people in hearing health, primary care, and the general consumer community. And our website is www.acialliance.org. And we actually have portals for people with different interests. So there's a parent portal and an adult portal. There's a hearing healthcare portal and a primary care portal. We get a lot of calls from primary care physicians who want to know more about it, what the candidacy is. We have a big map that has our organizational members on it. So somebody can click on that and see state by state where there's a CI clinic, because remember, this isn't this isn't something where you could just walk into any clinic. It's a specialized center that has typically physicians and audiologists there. If they're doing children, they also have an SLP. They often have psychologists and social workers, and sometimes they have a teacher of the deaf that's on the staff. So it really is a team approach to this medical intervention. And so the teams come together. They come to our meeting and the whole team comes. So that's also pretty cool. But the other thing we have is a Facebook page and a Twitter page and a LinkedIn page. So we use social media quite a lot. And we'd love for people to follow us on that. And then recently, we started a new publication that's free. That's for anybody that wants to sign up. It comes out once a month. It's electronic. It's called Listening. And so it comes out usually the first week of the month, and you can sign up for that by just going on our website and filling out a form. We don't ask you to pay anything. If you want to become a member, we welcome anyone to be a member, but you don't have to be. Mainly, we just want to communicate. We have about 7,000 people that follow us on Listening. So a really great following of people from, all over the place that just want to know more. We welcome veterans to come in and be part of the organization. And we have veteran stories that are on the website. We find that veterans want to see the stories of other veterans. And so we actually interviewed a number of veterans about their CI experience, both through the VA and not through the VA. So those stories are on the site. We think that's another important aspect of.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. Any final words of wisdom for our viewers out there, the people out there that are working in the hearing care professions? What do you think they need to know when it comes to cochlear implants?
I want them to know that this is not a last resort. I want them to encourage their patients to get evaluated if they're struggling with their hearing aids. And in general, that evaluation is covered by insurance. And even if someone isn't a candidate today, we find that people always indicate that they appreciate the information. They appreciate knowing that down the road, if their hearing deteriorates, that they have another solution that will allow them to stay connected. So rather than saying to someone, I have one more hearing aid for you, when someone is only getting 35% of the words and sentences, instead of saying I have one more hearing aid, if they're profound and they're only getting 35% of words and sentences, they're probably a candidate. So you can really help your patient by telling them where to go to get an evaluation done. And I can guarantee you that patient will never forget their hearing care provider for doing that. I talk about the audiologist that sent me on for an evaluation all the time. She gets patients in all the time who have heard me talk about Susan. And she did it in a very gentle and appropriate way when I wasn't doing very well with my high-tech hearing aids at the time. She said, I've done everything I can for you and you're still not doing very well. So I really think you should explore this. And that's all she did. She told me patients that I could talk to, and she was there to support me all along the way. And I have never forgotten that. And I think it meant a lot to her that she contributed to what happened to me to be just an extraordinary intervention, an extraordinary ability to contribute in different ways to this field, to travel all over the world and help people learn more about cochlear implants. To that I owe Susan. Maybe I would have done it at some point, but she got me going on it sooner. So that's what I would say to everyone who's listening.
That's a great story to end on. Thank you, Donna Sorkin, Executive Director of the American Cochlear Implant Alliance. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. I enjoyed being here with you.